Um, our center is a center based here at the School of Community College at the University of Wisconsin, Madison, that does teaching, research, and outreach around themes related to civil society, communities, and nonprofit and other purpose-based organizations. If you're new to our center, we encourage you to connect and make sure to sign in if you're here on our sign-in sheet, or if you're here by Zoom, we'll make sure to capture your information so that we can stay in touch with you. Our center has done a variety of outreach programming throughout our short history, some of which has been called CommUniversity sessions, which usually has meant some short form informational session whereby we bring in community practitioners or experts on topics like the ones that we look at and study. And we try to share that kind of expert perspective from the field or have a discussion that can benefit our students, our faculty, and our community partners. So that's been a little bit of a hodgepodge in how we've delivered that kind of programming since the pandemic. We did do it throughout the pandemic, but now that we're kind of in the post-pandemic era, we really wanted to settle into more of a groove of how we're going to deliver our CommUniversity programming. So this is the first of what will become a very consistent series that you can keep an eye out for, whereby every third Thursday of the month at noon in the School of Community College building, maybe not this room, but this building, we will have a CommUniversity session on a topic that we've heard from our stakeholders is important to them. And so you're going to get the chance at the end of today to even give us feedback on what topics you're interested in. So spread the word. This will hopefully be an ongoing, consistent, fun thing that we can all learn from outside the classroom, bridging between campus and community. And we will also be consistently recording these and offering them via Zoom, so that if you can't be here in person, you can tap in and or that you can watch later on our website. So I think those are my housekeeping bits for today that I wanted to share. One thing I will mention too, in case you have to go early, I'll try to remember to say it at the end as well. Next month is on April 18th, and it's going to feature the Civic Health Heroes that we, along with Love Wisconsin, an amazing storytelling platform in our community, but also that reaches all corners of Wisconsin and is recognized well beyond Wisconsin as an exemplar in telling stories of different Wisconsinites from different perspectives and experiences, and really building those bridges and connections across who we are together as a Wisconsin community. We curated with them a series on civic health heroes. So for individuals who in their Wisconsin communities, not necessarily through like a big title or job or official role, but as residents who do things because they are inspired to connect in their communities and make their communities better. We did a series on 4 such exemplars in Wisconsin, and it's on Love Wisconsin, and those individuals are invited to be on a panel with us April 18th to talk about what it's like to just be a person in your community building civic health. So keep an eye out for that one. We'll re-promote it just like we did for this one through our channels. With no further ado, then I'd like to get into the discussion for today, which is focused on organizations serving communities that are experiencing immigration or refugee status in Wisconsin. There are many more such organizations in Wisconsin than the ones we're going to feature here today, but these are ones that we have some direct connections with. They all do something a little bit different. And unfortunately today, Erin Barbado of the Immigrant Justice Clinic at the law school at the last minute could not be here due to illness. But that's a center here on our campus at the law school that provides services from a legal perspective to immigrants. You can learn more about them on their website. And then in turn, without her being here, we'll have 3 other organizations that we'll be speaking with: Alight, Jewish Social Services of Madison, and the Community Immigration Law Center. They all have very different angles on this work and different stories, and we're really excited to hear from them and their representatives that are here with us today. Our colleague, Dr. Zoe Wang, with Department of Civil Society and Community Studies, has agreed to facilitate the actual substantive discussion today. So I'm going to turn it over to her. She herself, and I'll allow you to share about this as you wish, Dr. Wang has experience working on some of these issues as well, so she seemed like the perfect person to nurture this discussion today. So thank you so much for facilitating today, Zoa, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much for organizing the panel. together these ways of organization. So is everybody able to hear me? Yeah, okay, perfect. We will start off with a round robin session where each organization is invited to share what their mission of the organization is, and what the board looks like on a daily basis. And then from there, we will move into the open panel discussion with questions that were circulated. Does that sound good to everybody? Okay. I'll just start out with the list on here, with, Jewish social services. Would you like to start?
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, thank you. And I've got my camera turned off because of reception, so I apologize. But it seems to be stronger without the camera on. So my name is Kai Gardner-Mishlove. I'm the Executive Director of Jewish Social Services of Madison. And our mission at JSS is to provide support, advocacy, and social service provision to vulnerable communities in the Dane County area. And so we serve a variety of different communities, different populations, from refugees and immigrants to those who are at risk of homelessness, who may be from here, to seniors, to Holocaust survivors, to folks who are dealing with whatever barriers that they're dealing with that prevent them from acclimating. So at JSS, we started out in the 30s, and we started out resettling. When we're talking about refugees and immigrants, we started out resettling Jews who were fleeing the Holocaust and pogroms. And then we expanded, and in 2015, we became an affiliate of HIAS, which is the oldest refugee resettlement agency in the country, one of 10 contracted with the State Department. So since then, we've been settling other communities outside of folks who were from the Jewish community. In addition, we provide services through several other departments outside of refugee resettlement, of which some of our immigrant populations may receive services from, such as our Family and Senior Services Department, our Spiritual Life Department, and our Refugee Resettlement Department is the largest department of the agency, and we are the only refugee resettlement agency in South Central Wisconsin. Our work on a daily basis is very, very busy because we have different departments, different populations, a diversity of populations, and I'm proud to say a diversity of staff. We have over 20 different languages that are spoken on our staff, and we feel very confident about providing services from acclimation to housing to employment support, and we refer out for immigration legal support. We partner with Silk, and we partner with various health partners at UW and Group Health Cooperative to provide some of the medical screenings and follow-up care that's necessary specifically for our refugee and immigrant population. And that's one important thing I forgot to mention. So we do this work inspired by Jewish values such as welcoming the stranger, honoring your elders, repairing the world, but these are universal values. So we provide services in an inclusive manner to any population, but it is based on those values. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Next we have a light.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having us part of this discussion. Really excited to be here and share a little bit about our work. So I'm representing Light. We are a global humanitarian organization based here in Minnesota. I'm in Minneapolis, so happy to be joining you from across the border here. And we actually began our journey in 1979 as the American Refugee Committee, really with this belief in the abundance of everyday people and the power of the possible. And today we are a borderless organization. We have 2,500 staff working in 20 countries. And so, we the day-to-day work for us looks very different depending on where in the world you are, but I'm on our US programs team, working on private sponsorship of refugees. So our US program really comprises three pillars. Number one is directly serving newcomers along their journey of resettlement. Number two is working to build the welcoming capacity of others. And then number three is doing everything we can to facilitate connections and community among all stakeholders involved. And so the primary pillar of this work for our US programs team at the moment is through private sponsorship of refugees, which is, you know, a new and evolving space that allows individuals to come together and essentially serve as guides through the process of resettlement as refugees from all around the world arrive here in the US and just need a helping hand and somebody to walk alongside them as they really bravely rebuild their lives. And so we work in conjunction with community partners and other stakeholders to really augment the work of some of those existing resettlement agencies that you just heard about. And, you know, to date, we're really proud of the fact that we're able to say that to date, we have supported over 175 sponsor groups all across the country. We have a good handful of sponsor groups in Wisconsin and in the Madison area even who are doing this work. And so the day-to-day work that we do is number one, educating folks about this pretty new opportunity, you know, private sponsorship of refugees, as I said, evolving, but really condensing and solidifying over the last year or two. And then the second part is providing support to sponsors and to newcomers along that journey with our team of experts who are able to support as folks are getting resettled. So that is, you know, just a little piece of what we do and a really broad overview, but hopefully that answers the question. Yeah.
Fantastic. So we have two organizations that really work in synergy together in terms of thinking about refugees and refugee resettlement. And last but not least, we have Community Immigration Law Center.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Natalia Lusak. I'm lead project attorney with the Community Immigration Law Center, or SILC, as we say. And we provide legal services to immigrants throughout Wisconsin, but mainly in Dane County. We specifically represent immigrants who are in removal, or also called deportation proceedings, both on the detained and non-detained side. So detained for folks who ICE or Immigration Customs and Enforcement has detained, and then non-detained are just as it sounds, people are not detained. That is our specialty. We also provide, we coordinate community events to provide legal services to the community as well. Unfortunately, there are not enough immigration attorneys to represent every single person who needs representation. And so to try to bridge the gap and at least have people get access to some piece of legal information, ability to get a legal consultation, we have two events or kind of clinics that we have. So one is our Silk Friday. So twice a month, we have a consultation event. So basically, we work with volunteers, and I'll make a pitch for volunteers in a moment, but we have volunteers assist with kind of obtaining information from immigrants who've made appointments with us to have a consultation. So they kind of collect the information, and then we have volunteer immigration attorneys review sorry, can you guys hear me? I don't know. Yeah, okay. We have volunteer immigration attorneys review sort of the intake information and provide legal advice. And so this is a way for folks to get access to information specific to their case. Many of those folks, unfortunately, we cannot represent, but last year we provided over 400 consultations to folks. So it's really empowering them by giving information, legal information. And the other project that we have that I coordinate specifically is the Pro Se Asylum Clinic. So a lot of people we meet are recent arrivals and are asylum seekers. They want to apply for asylum. excuse me, sorry, the process to apply is quite complex. You have to complete a form in English, you need to send it to the right place. And so and there's also a 1-year deadline. You have to apply within your first year of entering the United States. And it can be really overwhelming to kind of be able to submit that form properly. And so we created this program so that we could assist asylum seekers with completing the form and then sending it on their behalf. This program has existed for about 1.5 years, and we've submitted over 200 asylum applications. Again, most of these folks, unfortunately, we're not able to represent them because asylum cases are quite complex, and the process is very long, but this gives them an opportunity to be able to try to find an attorney on their own, whether it's private or maybe our capacity opens up in the future, and gives them an opportunity to make their asylum claim. So those are our main programs, and we have volunteers for both the Silk Friday consultation days and the Pro Se Asylum Clinic. And so we work with community members in doing that work. As Kai mentioned, we work really closely with Jewish Social Services, also Centro Hispano, and the Immigration Affairs Office, the Dane County Immigration Affairs Office. The day-to-day, I mean, every day is a bit different. You know, some days we have court, or we're preparing for court, or we're preparing, completing forms, we're having meetings on our event days. We're kind of managing that, and sort of the whole day is us doing consultations or reviewing asylum applications. So it's never a dull moment.
So we can't hear, I think you're muted there. So we can't hear what's happening in the room at the moment.
Are you able to hear us now? Yeah, okay, perfect. I was just saying that we'll move into the open panel discussion now. The different representatives of the different organizations can feel free to answer the questions as they want. So I hope it's going to be more of a dynamic conversation as opposed to, the kind of sequential round robin that we just did. We will have some time at the end for a Q&A too. So audience members who are present and online can also jump in and contribute towards the end if that's okay. So the first question is, what are some current trends, challenges, and opportunities in the work that you do in your organization?
So I can jump in on this. Talking about specifically some of these areas of private sponsorship, I think the main challenge is also the main trend, is also the main opportunity. We are early on, and sponsorship has existed in some form for quite a long time here in the US in different ways, but sort of the newest generation of sponsorship, as I mentioned, really dates back to early 2023. And so we are in the process of just trying to share with the community, both stakeholders, but also folks who are just interested in rolling up their sleeves and volunteering about these different opportunities. It's a really big innovation in refugee resettlement. And so the biggest challenge that we have is letting everybody know that it exists. The main trend that we're seeing is that as time goes on, as people start to do this, as they see others in their community do it, they are sort of recognizing this as a legitimate way to sort of give back and expand the welcoming capacity of their community. And I think that's really the opportunity, as well as this continues to grow and build momentum. We're really hopeful that this can be a self-sustaining model that can fit into the current landscape of refugee resettlement, to augment the work that other community partners are doing, and really to take some of the pressure off of some of the community partners. You hear from everybody who's doing this work in any way with with new arrivals, asylum seekers, immigrants, refugees. There is always this squeeze for resources and time. And so we hope that by bringing more everyday, quote, everyday Americans, people who just want to help into the conversation, that it can sort of lighten the load for everybody and really increase our capacity.
And I can jump in next. Speaking about resources, so at JSS, we have limited funding. We receive federal and state funding to provide refugee resettlement to various populations. And so that means that we serve folks from the moment we pick them up from the airport, and then we provide services to them. They're eligible for up to 5 years. So those services may involve, making sure that people are enrolled in ESL, that they are enrolled in citizenship classes, that they receive employment training or education training, and that their housing is stable. So to talk about challenges that could be an opportunity, we just haven't figured out where the opportunity is yet. I want to focus on housing. And Dane County has the highest rent increases and also the lowest amount of available housing in the region. And so that makes it very difficult for us when we're accepting people of where we're going to place them, because keep in mind, we're able to provide housing support for them for up to 3 months. But after that, the expectation is that they're self-sufficient. This is a federal guideline, not our guideline, the federal guideline. And that's sort of a big ask for folks to be totally self-sufficient, able to pay for their rent, and able to navigate all of these different systems that are even difficult to navigate if you're English speaking and from this country. So, for example, picking up there's some cases we can't take. We cannot take cases of families that are over 6 because we just can't find 3 and 4 bedroom housing that's available for them. In addition, we're just seeing the squeeze over the last year of folks who are beyond that 90-day period of being able to afford their housing. And it's because, keep in mind, we're competing with developers who are coming in with very high priced housing, and also other factors that are making the market very unstable. In addition, there are certain requirements that are in place for renters that refugees are unable to meet, such as a credit history. So we spend a lot of time trying to convince landlords and management companies of the viability of how it's a good risk for them, very low risk for them to rent to refugees. And in addition, some of the other challenges are our employment market, making sure that we're able to match refugees with who are coming in with certain talents and expertise with what's available in our market. We may have someone who's coming in who's a dentist that we have to place at Culver's or in some factory because their credentials don't transfer until we can, help them pivot into either something else that's similar, or either they can get their credentialing here. So there are a lot of different factors that are in place.
I think the theme of resources comes up in our work too with, as I mentioned earlier, there are just not enough immigration attorneys, even just nationwide, to kind of be able to represent every single person that's in removal proceedings. I think nationally, there is about 3 million pending cases in the immigration court system. So these are folks where, a judge is reviewing their asylum. A lot of them are asylum applications, but other sorts of applications as well, and determining eligibility for applications and, determining whether this person can remain in the United States or be deported. Because of those 3 million cases, it can take a long time for there to be sort of any movement or adjudication on a case. And I just kind of want to explain, because the other Aiden and Kai are talking about refugees. I mostly work with asylum seekers. Just want to explain the difference. So refugees are processed outside the United States and are found that to meet the requirements for the definition of refugee. And so when they enter the United States, they enter with status. So they have access to these various benefits, federal benefits, et cetera. So asylum seekers are folks who are applying for asylum who are already in the United States. So they have come many of the folks we work with have entered through the southern border and, you know, have made a claim for asylum, saying that they fear return to their country of origin. And they're given an opportunity to apply for asylum that's under our domestic laws and also international treaty obligations. And so the folks we're working with, as I mentioned, we're trying to help them actually submit the asylum application so it can be reviewed by a judge. And they also are in a challenging position because they don't technically have status. They're not able to get a work permit right away. So they're kind of facing the same challenges as other, you know, refugees and other recent arrivals, trying to figure out the system, not speaking English, various education backgrounds. And so even though our work is legal and not, you know, social services, it is very much tied together because we can't, you know, in terms of the order of like importance for any individual, it's like they need housing, they need food, and then, you know, the legal services, you know, their legal case kind of comes lower in the list. So, you know, to help people be able to focus on their legal services, they need to have, you know, a safe place to live and be able to kind of support themselves or find support elsewhere. So, you know, I think that the challenge is sort of being able to support all these newcomers and providing them the information about a really complex system. Just the legal system is really complicated. It's not intuitive. It's not really honestly created to be able to manage without an attorney. And these folks are not entitled to attorneys. They can have an attorney if they can afford one or can find a pro bono attorney. But there isn't one that's provided by the state. So like different from criminal court, for example. And so it's just a lot to navigate. And so we're just really trying to be able to get information to as many people as possible so that they can understand and again, empower them with knowledge of, okay, this is what's happening, this is what to expect. And also so they don't fall victim, unfortunately, of unscrupulous practitioners who do tend to take advantage of the vulnerability of asylum seekers. And so, you know, having them pay money for things they may not be eligible for or kind of doing other shady things. So getting the sort of information about their rights and what the options are is a challenge for sure.
Really appreciate you making the distinction between the refugees with official status and asylum seekers, because as you mentioned, that's so important in terms of the routes of integration or potential integration. And kind of going back to this issue of trends, I was wondering if you all could speak a little bit about how geopolitical patterns around the world and the shifting sources of where the countries where refugees are coming from affect the way the services that you provide, but also, you know, on this issue of resources too, because as you know, depending on where the refugees are coming from, they may have greater access to resources from the get-go versus others. And our political climate is such that certain refugee populations have access to more resources from the get-go as well too. And I really appreciate your contextualizing Kai earlier on when you introduced your organization about the early work that the organization did with resettling Jewish refugees. And now I'm thinking about the most recent waves of refugees from Afghanistan, but also from the Ukraine, and how these kinds of population trends and geopolitical conflicts have shifted the work that you do in many.
I can start with that. Thank you. So, you know, immigration policy and the way things are rolled out as far as what refugees are resettled and where they go to are, you know, determined at a higher level. So as you mentioned before, we started out resettling Jewish refugees. Now we resettle folks from Afghanistan, Ukraine, the Congo, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Central African Republic, Iraq, I know I'm missing somewhere. Oh, Venezuela, Honduras, Cuba, and we've had a few Haitians come through. So, oh, and Somalis as well. So the difference is some populations receive funding that's specifically slated for them. So we have an abundance of support for our Afghan population and our Ukrainian population. We do, so it's sort of like a carve out of extra services that are available for those populations. We do not have the same sort of resources for our Congolese, Eritrean, Ethiopian, Iraqi, Venezuelan, Honduran populations. So that means as an agency, we have to figure out a way to make things equitable regarding the support and the services that we can provide. So that may mean looking for extra funding. And I'm not trying to say that any of the populations, such as the Afghan or the Ukrainian, do not deserve the support. All refugees coming through receive as much support as possible as can be given to them. There's actually not enough support, in my opinion, for any of them. But if we're looking at the way that things are rolled out, how the federal government makes funding available, I do wish that extra things were given to all of the populations that we serve. Certain conflicts are given more attention than other conflicts. And so I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that all of the populations that we're serving are fleeing extreme danger. And we need as much support, as much volunteers, as much sponsorship as we can get to provide them the support that they need. Remember, everyone's coming through with trauma. And that's an area that I think in the US we could do a better job of providing support for.
Yeah, I mean, Kai was talking on sort of where federal dollars are going. Our organization does not get any federal dollars. It's mostly our funders are, private foundational, and some from Dane County and the city of Madison. And so with sort of similarly, there's certain, there's certain groups that private funders or kind of local funding are or local funders are more interested in like providing grants for. And it can sort of, again, be sort of related to the hot topic maybe. So we also have some funding for Afghans and are serving Afghans and assisting them with some asylum cases and some other legal services as well. And, aside from the funding, just talking about sort of in the sort of legal services world, a lot of the asylum seekers we meet with are from Central or South America, but we do work with everyone. And so oftentimes in sort of even, filling out the form for asylum, you need to have some understanding of like what is going on in their country of origin, to be able to kind of put it in context to some extent. Again, even if it's just filling out the form. And so it's really requires understanding some history and politics from different countries, or being able to kind of get up to speed very quickly, and then also significant cultural differences, and trying to be culturally sensitive to and aware of assumptions that we Americans are like having been raised in the United States, assumptions that I make, and trying to really be mindful about that with everyone I work with. And so yeah, sort of just really needing kind of an awareness and just sort of general like kind of willingness to learn about different cultures, and sometimes making mistakes, but kind of owning up to it. Yeah.
I think one thing that I just like to add to this part of the conversation is In a similar way to how Natalia made the distinction between asylum seekers and refugees, we also have a third distinction here when we are talking about a large chunk of the population of Ukrainians, Afghans, who have come to the US in recent years here under humanitarian parole, which again, talking about like the difficult and complex web of terminology and legal status. This is another way that makes it really difficult for folks to understand where they fit into the context as they arrive as newcomers, but also, of course, politically changes the access to resources, pathways towards citizenship, permanent residence, all of these things. So that's another piece. You know, Natalia mentioned that the legal system is not set up necessarily to be easy to understand for anybody, but especially for newcomers. This is another place that really compounds that as we think about like certain populations who are afforded the ability to come here under humanitarian parole, which, you know, incredibly necessary, as we saw in the case of the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban and the invasion of Ukraine, the political instability in certain Latin American countries that have this humanitarian parole pathway available as well here. So, you know, just always thinking about the complexity of the legal status and the legal situation obviously makes a huge impact on resource availability, and that comes from politics.
That's actually a really nice segue into the next question I'd like you all to consider, which is, what are some systems changes that are needed to kind of more generally, but also to support the work that you're doing? We've already touched a little bit about that, but yeah.
I would say more collaboration across systems. So for example, in Madison, we have an awful lot of nonprofits. And it would be great if we all could work together, come together as a roundtable, perhaps, to share resources, to share best practices. And the other thing I would say is that, you know, systems also need to be aware that if you can serve or provide the best service to the most vulnerable among you, you uplift the services and the access for all of the other populations that you're serving. So if I'm looking at the refugee population, a population coming in with limited maybe English proficiency, perhaps some people are pre-literate, perhaps some folks are, you know, basically just confused about how to navigate systems effectively. If you can provide systems in place that accommodate that population for that need, then you're going to assist other populations as well, who may not be refugees, but who may be from other populations that are you know, who are dealing with challenges. I really do think that the more that we talk to each other and collaborate with each other, we can see these trends. Like what you're doing today is wonderful. We're all coming together. I would like to see that even outside of this room with even groups that may not be, for example, refugee specific, but they may be providing services to vulnerable populations. Because keep in mind, refugees are going to be accessing those same services that other populations are accessing, whether it's public benefits or something, transportation, etc.
To kind of expand on that, could not agree more with all of that, Kai. I think there's also, this is one thing that we're really trying to work on actively every day is just community buy-in to the whole process of welcoming for asylum seekers, for refugees, for humanitarian parolees, regardless of legal status and like immigration pathway. We are trying to educate folks about the benefit of having diverse communities with newcomers. We are trying to facilitate cross-cultural communication as much as possible. And I think the more that those pieces can happen, the more that community groups, individuals can buy into being an active part of this process, the better. So everything that we can do, you know, I think that this is a great example, not only of that facilitation of conversation between different practitioners, if you want to call us that, but also getting the public involved and familiar with the different kind of work and resources that exist as they think about their contribution to their community and to with their time and with their energy and effort, and even just with their attention. I think it's so important to be giving these kinds of issues attention. It really amplifies the work that all of the community partners are doing.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's sort of the buy-in from the community, and even just explaining, because the immigration process is complex and highly politicized as well. So it can be quite easy for people to fall into camps, but to not really understand like what's happening. And I think when we talk about asylum seekers as this one like lump, or refugees or immigrants generally as this one lump, it really like dehumanizes them. And like, these are people, right? These are human beings. And there are various factors that led to them leaving their home country. It is not easy. It is not easy to leave your home behind. And so I think that, having the understanding is important. And then like, from my perspective, like hoping that buy-in, that understanding, that humanizing of immigrants can like lead to changes in the law, because there has not been comprehensive immigration reform in over 30 years, and the system is broken. It is not meant for what we're experiencing today. And it is just not sustainable. And I think, a lot of people see in the news sort of what's going on in Washington, D.C. and in various states. The current system is not working, and it's broken. To have 3 million pending cases in the immigration court is insane. People are not having hearings for 5, 6, 7 years. I mean, that is just not a system that's working. So I would say kind of the working together as a community, the informing, the broader community of non-immigrants about, the work that we do and the experience of immigrants generally, and hopefully leading to some actual changes in law.
And if I could piggyback off of that also, I'd like to say that beyond the humanitarian reasons that we should be welcoming newcomers and refugees and immigrants, also there needs to be an increased awareness about the contributions to the GDP. People don't realize that refugees, and even if contribute millions of dollars to our GDP. And so there's a false narrative out there that they are taking more than they're giving. But if you look at the level of social entrepreneurship, of home ownership, and other contributions that these communities are making to our community, to me, that's a win-win. Even if you don't care about humanitarian, if you're just a person who only cares about money, you should be thinking, wow, this is really contributing to, the financial advancement of our community.
I hear all of you say that some of the systems issues, changes that need to happen are the things that we typically think about, like the legal infrastructure, the financial infrastructure, and but also a really important piece is changing the culture and the kind of attitude, right? So I spent the last 13 years in Canada, and in Canada, we have a very different discourse, political discourse, cultural discourse, and attitude around immigration more generally and refugees. I remember living in Montreal and seeing on the news Prime Minister Trudeau with this very welcoming missive to refugees and asylum seekers coming through the U.S. into Canada and saying, if America doesn't want you and Trump doesn't want you, come into our doors and we will want you, and more generally, not that Canada is not without its issues and highly politicized discourses too, but the kind of general leadership at the top and the lay population see immigration, just as you said, Kai, as a benefit to society. And so, what I pick up from what the three of you are sharing is that, we really need to shift the discourse and shift the culture and the way that we think about refugees and immigration more generally in the United States. And that will go towards a long way of changing some of these systems issues and challenges that many of you have brought up. So in the last 10 minutes or so, I'd like to open up the conversation to folks in the audience for questions to our guest speakers.
I'll ask a question sort of for those that might view the recording later in classes and such. We are here at the School of Community College preparing, the next generation of change agents and leaders around gnarly issues and great opportunities in our human community. From your experience in this work as professionals, what kinds of things would you recommend that someone in their early career or in their education, their higher education stage of their trajectory kind of try to develop or learn or get exposure to if they're interested in these fields and want to be effective? Like, if you could dial the clock back and prepare yourself even more for these roles, like what sorts of things would you wish you had gotten earlier?
I would say opportunities to volunteer. I would encourage anyone who's interested in any of these, topics as you're developing your career to volunteer at an agency that's working with refugees and newcomers. And so you've got examples here of all of the different work that we're doing. I would encourage students, folks who are just new starting out. If you're interested in immigration, legal services, if you're interested in health services, directed at refugees, to volunteer at an organization that's doing that, or even intern at an organization that's doing that, so that you can get a hands-on experience.
One thing that's helpful with our work is knowledge of languages other than English. Which I know, it's hard, not easy for everyone to learn other languages, but I sometimes wish I had, in university, spent more time. I studied French and I wish I'd studied Spanish. That would have been a lot more useful. But sort of kind of continue to work on those skills. I know a lot of people in high school take classes and then don't continue. It can be extremely helpful to be able to, again, speak a language other than English, because we are, working with, I would say, like 99% of our clients don't speak English as their first language. And so that can be just sort of a helpful skill, and even something, if you do speak another language, making sure to have it on your resume for, because that can be helpful for an employer or for us to know.
And I'll first of all echo both of those points. Those are two of the things that I had on my mind. Last thing is just, and Natalia kind of referred to this earlier, but learning as much about history, politics around the world as possible, really helpful for understanding the context of where we are, what causes people to emigrate and immigrate. You can't get the full picture without having some understanding of that political history.
So we have a couple of questions in the chat. The first one is from Matt, and he was asking, is the idea out there that the overarching organizational body provide a grant funding program to the satellite body to seed sponsorship in the satellite body? He said, this is where and how I am sponsoring 7 Ukrainians coming from under U4U next Thursday through the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Would you mind repeating a little bit of that? I'm sorry.
Also in the chat.
Yeah, it's also in the chat if you want to open that up on Zoom.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I think Matt accidentally sent it to me as a direct message, so I will speak up and ask it again. Is the idea out there that the overarching organizational body provide a grant funding program to the satellite body to see the sponsorship in the satellite body?
So essentially asking if there's mechanisms in place where an organization like Jewish Social Services subawards some resources or funding to more like local, even more local private sponsors.
Thank you.
Okay, if I understand the question, I think it was, I'm sorry, because the reception's kind of spotty for me. The question was whether there's an opportunity for JSS to send resources to some of the sponsorship groups.
Yes.
Actually, no, we don't receive enough resources for the services that we're providing. And so, for example, the funding that we receive is specifically supposed to go towards core services and other specialized services that we're contracted to provide. So with the circles that are coming up, which is wonderful, part of the and Aiden, you can correct me if I'm incorrect. Part of the expectation is that folks who are agreeing to become a part of that sponsorship circle have to raise the funds for themselves to do that work for that first 90 days. So that's a different funding stream. It's sort of shifting refugee resettlement a little bit more towards support from private sponsors and less on the feds and the state government. And I think also another reason that this is happening also is because there are a lot of folks that need to be moved out soon, who are refugees. And so this is another way to open it out so that we can increase capacity beyond the Refugee Resettlement Agency.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You can think of these as like two separate streams that are just working in the same direction. And so, yeah, our private sponsor groups, now there are different funding avenues and different organizations that are providing funding to private sponsor groups to do this, but it is coming from a separate stream from those traditional resettlement agencies. And to that last point, yeah, we have a huge backlog of folks who have refugee status, living abroad, who have been approved for resettlement here in the US, but who are still waiting in refugee camps, waiting in precarious living situations, because they don't have either a sponsor group or a resettlement agency with capacity that puts up their hand and says, we can welcome this person in our community. So that is really the idea, is that resettlement agencies continue doing the work that they're doing, and then these private sponsor groups can help lighten the load a little bit without eating into any funding or time or resources.
I think what's interesting, Aiden, about the work that Light is doing and the new opportunities that you mentioned is that, we historically, like, we've always had refugee resettlement agencies, and we've always had private sponsor groups like churches sponsoring refugees, right? But with this new sponsorship mechanism, you can have individuals coming together, not necessarily affiliated with a church or another religious organization, coming together with, it said, I think it's like $2,500 that they have to put together to help the refugees that they're sponsoring. And that really opens up the pool of potential private sponsors who could bring in a refugee family or individuals, which is very different from the traditional pathways of a set religious organization or a set federally recognized organization. So Jewish Social Services, for instance, is, I believe, one of 7 recognized resettlement agencies that receive federal funding in the state of Wisconsin. And the kind of work, I think some of the challenges that your organization has, Aiden, is, from my perspective, I think, educating, and you mentioned this too, educating your private sponsors, and giving them the tools that an organization like Jewish Social Services has built in place already, because they need those tools and those infrastructure in order to get that recognition as a resettlement agency. With the move to private sponsorship and private individual groups, that education has to come from somewhere else, and I think that's a gap that your organization is filling there.
That's right, yeah. And even going back to what you mentioned about sort of the social climate and how that impacts. Thinking about Canada, Canada has had a program of private sponsorship, just like the one that we've got here in the US now, for decades, and they have really huge buy-in. They resettle 10,000 plus refugees through those private sponsor pathways every year. So this is something that's tried and tested. And we've seen it work elsewhere, and we're just doing everything we can to kind of bring people up to speed here in the US about the power of this community-driven approach to resettlement.
Are there more questions?
Yeah, we could probably have time for one more. Okay, the next question is, could someone speak to what services asylum seekers are eligible for while in the US, specifically related to housing and education?
So I can add a little bit about that. So at JSS, we have a walk-in clinic on Thursdays where often asylum seekers will come into our agency. And even though we don't receive funding for this population, we assist them as much as we can, but mostly it's to refer them out for other services. There's not a whole lot that they're eligible for. If you're thinking about housing, if you are an asylum, until you receive that status, you are not eligible for public benefits. So, and some landlords may be reluctant to rent to you. So, for example, if you're going to compare an asylum seeker with someone who's already got refugee status, that refugee is eligible for everything that a citizen would be eligible for, as far as housing subsidies, as far as public benefits, W-2, food share. They also receive an employment authorization. So that's that's a stark difference. We're already having challenges getting landlords to even rent to refugees, so it's going to be even more difficult to convince them to rent to an asylum seeker when it's not clear where that income is going to come from to pay for that housing. So really, it's cobbling together as many resources as possible until that person receives, asylum status.
Yeah, to even sort of, Kai, I think you kind of hit on this, but like access to healthcare, right? Like, and each state is a little bit different. But like Medicaid, like in Wisconsin, my understanding, and Kai, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or Sunday, I see you're here, is that, you have to have status to have access to Medicaid. Some states are different with that. So, going to a doctor, I know there's a question about education. So the public schools, kids can be sent to public schools. So I guess that is a type of service. But if you're like thinking about like in-state tuition or something at UW, that is, there's no in-state tuition for someone who doesn't have status, or isn't even, I think, like a US citizen, I forget, or green card holder. Like I know DACA recipients aren't able to get in-state tuition. So just some additional.
We are coming up on our 1 hour clock.
There was one other person that raised her hand, and I think she might have been question in the chat. I just wonder if we can still address that one.
Yeah, we have 2 more questions in the chat.
Okay, do you think we have time do people have a few more minutes? If we can do it quickly? So do you? Yeah. Okay, let's do it.
Cool. Next question is, what are some things smaller communities can do to increase welcoming capacity? And more specifically, how can local governments aid in the welcoming infrastructure?
Well, so, I'll just, of course, put in a plug here for volunteers and private sponsor groups. One of the really powerful things about private sponsor groups is that whatever community you are in with 5 or more people who want to get together and do this welcoming work, you can do it. So we've had folks in smaller communities all over the country do this work of welcoming, and you really see the communities come around and rally around those cases. obviously different challenges when you are resettling folks in places with different resettlement infrastructure, maybe less resettlement infrastructure, fewer access to less access to transportation, et cetera. But we have seen it work in smaller communities for sure. So that is one way that people in all communities can get together and make an immediate change, is by putting up their hand and saying, I want to be a private sponsor. I want to do this work.
And I would agree with that. We always need more volunteers, people in the community who are willing to talk to their neighbors, their friends, their networks about the importance of welcoming and how you welcome and how you do it with cultural humility and awareness. To remember that, to look at things from not a deficit standpoint, but a resilience standpoint, that the refugee communities coming in need support, but they're also bringing a lot to the table, because many of them have overcome challenges that many of us here would not be able to overcome. So to always look at what positive aspect, what can we learn from these communities? And so we need advocacy, we need awareness, and we also need local and state governments to support this. And we need the general public to push back against regulations that restrict refugees in such a way. And I'll give you an example. There's a current bill right now that's being sponsored that is asking for local municipalities within 100 miles of resettlement to be informed specifically of who those folks are who are coming in, what populations. There are already mechanisms that have been in place for years between the refugee resettlement agencies and volunteer groups and all of the local municipalities. For example, at JSS, we have a quarterly consult where we invite all of our partners to come in and we tell you exactly how many refugees we're going to be resettling and from what populations, and that for a way in which to collaborate. But this new bill that's in place is to restrict things. It's, where we have to get approval from communities before someone can be resettled. That's a big problem. We don't restrict it's discriminatory also. We don't restrict different populations of where they can move in a community. And so that's very, very concerning. And I'm gonna put in the chat the number of the bill.
Thank you. So our last question is, if a person is looking for asylum, in our case from Colombia, where do we send them to?
I responded in the chat, but I just included a link to the Immigration Advocates Network. They have a list of, for each state of legal service providers. And so a person can, look at their state and try to find a legal service provider in their community to see if they can get support.
Thank you.
I will also, oh, never mind. That's all right. That's a good starting place.
Before I turn it over to Maribeth to close us, I just want to thank everybody and invite you all to join me in thanking our panelists for conversation this afternoon.
Indeed, and thank you, Zoa. You were the perfect facilitator for this discussion. I hope this is just the beginning of ongoing conversations across our center and the university and organizations like yours that are doing this work. So let's all stay in touch, and thank you for not only taking the time today, but for the work that you're doing in our communities. So for all of you that are willing, we would love to hear your thoughts by using this QR code about how you thought today went and what other topics you'd like to see us do in the future. And yeah, stay in touch with us. Also, special thanks to Amanda and Michaela who made this all happen. We will be here again, as I mentioned before, on the third Thursday of April to talk about civic health here.